Welcome back to yet another video. Today we are going to discuss about Kafka interview related questions. So this video is about scenario based questions which are asked in Java Spring Boot and Kafka interview, which is asked in the real world IT companies, right? So if you are looking out for such video where specifically what kind of questions are asked in Kafka topics in general, then this video is about that. And also many subscriber has already asked for a video based on Kafka related interview questions which are asked in IT company. So hence I thought it was relevant to make this particular video. I will cover up most all the scenario based questions in part videos. So this is my first video. Let's look at it. So the very first question or the very first scenario I would say is that you have implemented a Spring Boot Kafka producer. So you must already be knowing Kafka has got consumer and producer. So here, however, the messages are not being delivered to the Kafka topic. What would be the potential reason? Now here the scenario is the messages are not being going to the topic. Okay, so there is zero messages and not being shown up, right? So what would be the possible failure? We have to find out. So now there are several causes for the message delivery. We'll look into one by one. Kafka broker connectivity issue. So this is one of the common causes. So what you have to ensure is that Kafka producer is able to connect it. Okay, your producer is able to connect to the Kafka broker. So you have to check for your configuration which is related to the Bootstrap server. So that is an important configuration which you have to check it. Now there might be a possibility of incorrect topic name. Now your consumer is or the producer is being subscribed to certain topic, right, from where the production and the consumer happens, right? So you have to double check your topic name that is configured for the producer, right, is matching with the correct actual topic. You have to log in and check your from the UI that this is the correct topic or not. Serialization issue also happens. Now ensure that your correct serialization is applied, like string serializer is there, integer serializer, there are different serializer we configure in the producer. Now apart from this, there are some Kafka producer configurations. You need to verify those, like acknowledgement retries, there is key serializer, there is value serializer, which are correctly being set or not. Mostly these are the problems which happens, and it fails due to that. Now also, like, topic is itself existing or not. Let's say you have given the topic name wherever the configuration is correct, but and it is intended with the same topic name which was asked for, but the topic itself is not existing in the UI or Kafka UI, right? So in the system server, so make sure that your auto correction is not enabled, and there is something before your application is startup. You have to check it, like a topic exists. Okay, make sure there is no network failures or network issues over there, because if your application is not able to connect to the broker, right, then there will be no message or the topic subscription happening, or there will be no message delivered to that particular server, right? So always check for that before your application gets started. Now how to troubleshoot this is that you have to enable your loggings in the Spring Boot application to check some Kafka producer, whatever the producer where it is producing the logs. Okay, so in that, ensure that you write certain logs, and also make ensure that those are all segregated in log levels, like debug, warning, or log info level, so that at different environments it is basically configured in such way. Now use configure console consumer console consumer to verify that the messages have been published to the topic. Okay, you can also verify it, like there are some UI tools where, like Kafka UI tools, which will be able to see like certain messages have been pushed to that particular topic. Let's take out the second scenario. Now you are question is like, you are building a Spring Boot application, okay, that consumes messages from the Kafka topic. Okay, now we are talking about the consumer part. Now the message is being consumed. Okay, the consumer application should perform certain actions like saving data into the database. However, the data is not being saved up. How would you troubleshoot this? Now, this is an real world scenario which might faced up, and you must be already faced up. So what, how to troubleshoot is that there are certain steps we can do that. What you have to do is that first check the consumer configuration. Now you have to check like the group ID, the auto subs, offset reset, enable auto commit. These are set correctly or not. So you have to check your consumer related configuration. After that, you have to check the consumer logs. Okay, so Kafka is going to produce certain logs, so you have to enable your logs and see certain while being message being consumed, and then there is any error being published, okay, during the consumption. So this gives you a clear picture of what I might be the error. Now, while processing message processing logic also, now you also have to check your message processing logic, which will include certain database operation which has been correctly implemented or not. This could involve like database connection, SQL statements, or some transaction management is not properly handled. So you have to ensure that your logic, whatever you have written, is properly working. You have to verify that. Now there might be a problem of database connectivity as well, so ensure your application is always connected. Since your application is getting started up, right? There are connection pools which we maintain. There is no such network failure or invalid credential like errors. So you check for the log once your application is up. There are no errors. Okay, when your application is trying to establish a connection, you should ensure that there is no such I would say errors which should fail. Now, apart from this, what we discussed, there should be a proper error handling. So this is quite basic and important. If you have not handled any exception, or you're not thrown anything while processing the message, and if the exception happens and you're not able to catch that, then there will be a problem, right? So there might be some database operation which you're trying to perform. So look into that aspect where you're properly navigating, or you're gracefully handling that particular exception. Now you have to always try to see there is a mechanism where you can retry it. So at the rate retriable, or you have to certainly look for some retry mechanism if there is certain failure. Okay. Now there are Kafka listeners. There are certain annotations, so that we have to properly annotate them with certain at the rate Kafka listener, and this is being properly registered in the Spring Boot application content. So make sure these all steps are being followed, and then you can your application will be able to save to the database properly. Let's look at the third scenario. Now you need to consume the message from the topic, okay, with certain delay. So there might be millions of records, and you wanted to, or might be the possibility that the message what we have consumed is quite big, okay. So you need some time to process that particular logic, okay. So let's say after consuming the message, you need to wait for certain few seconds or before processing the next set of messages. So he wanted to know how would you implement that in the Spring Boot with Kafka, right? So you must be knowing about there is a delay concept in the consumer by using the thread sleep, right? Or you can use some scheduling processing, there is an additional delay where you can introduce, right? So if you look at the actual code, right, where the method you write with the actual logic of code, so what you can do is that there you can actually introduce thread.sleep, which will kind of sleep for certain, let's say the 5,000 seconds here, like it means that it will wait for 5 seconds, okay. After that, it will process the next message. Now be very cautious about implementing this particular thread.sleep, because it can block your thread, and it can reduce your performance of your application or the consumer, right? So in terms of scalable application, this might you might have to use a certain a separate thread, or when it comes to scaling, right, you can use task scheduler, which will delay your processing without blocking that particular consumer, okay. So ensure that you have a proper implementation, so that you are not blocking certain threads in consuming it. Now next set is you are processing messages from the Kafka, so in your application. the consumer is running in the clustered environment. Now there you must have heard of, like, there are clustered of environments with multiple instances of the server, right? So how do you ensure that the each message is processed exactly once, and what configuration changes would you make in your application? Now there are multiple consumers who are going to consume it, right? And then how do you ensure that this particular in a multi-cluster environment, so how do you ensure that that is only processed once, okay, and there is no duplication uh, happening over here? So Kafka actually provides a mechanism where at least once a delivery semantics by default, okay, so it is providing that by default, meaning what happens is that when the message is processed at least once, they could be also be processed more than once in certain, right? So scenarios, I would say. So there might be some consumer crashes which might happen right before committing the offset. So to ensure that this exactly once processing, you need to configure certain Kafka and Spring Boot configuration. So we'll look into that one by one. Steps to implement exactly one processing is you have to make some Kafka configuration. So there is an IDM potency for Kafka producer, which will avoid processing or producing the duplicacy. Okay, so you need to check, like, if your IDM potency is enabled over here. So in this properties, you can add this particular property and enable it. You have to ensure that there is a transactional processing of the Kafka producer at an atomic city. So you can add this particular transaction ID preferences over prefix over there to ensure that, okay, enabling it. Now Kafka consumer configuration. So there are some manual offset, okay, that management and the offset commit only after the message has been properly processed. Okay, so ensuring that once it is consumed, only then only it will be set up. So you can do that. You can auto enable commit, which it is by default, right? You can actually make it as false. Okay, so the transaction, the Kafka transaction on the consumer side is going to ensure that if there is certain failure, then no offsets are committed, right? So and then the messages were successfully processed. So that's the reason it will. It will check for that until the message is completely processed, and then only it will commit the offset. Okay. Now there are how to acknowledge that particular parameter using the Throughput option. We have seen here I've written a code aware which will showcase that once the message is properly processed, okay, and after there is no failure, okay, then it is going to acknowledge that particular message, or it is going to commit that particular offset, okay, manually. So that's the how where we are going to do that. Now Kafka transactional consumer. Now if you use Kafka transaction on the consumer side to ensure that there is no proper processing, if there is or no offset are being committed until the message is properly processed. Okay, that's what we have to ensure. Now you are required to implement a Spring Boot Kafka producer that need to send message to the multiple topics based on certain dynamic criteria. How would you implement that? So here earlier, like, there was a scenario where there was only one certain topic involvement, and it was subscribed. Now here actually the scenario is there are certain, might be more than one topic which are there, and then based on the certain condition you need to send this. Okay, I wanted to know, like, how would you implement that? So you can implement this particular dynamic selection based on the programmatic determination of an topic name being send in the message. Okay, so what you can do is that at the initial step is that, like, how do you code it? You have to inject that particular Kafka template in your service, basically the service layer. Then what you can do is that there is a method called Kafka send in the Kafka template, which will you have to give the name of that particular topic, okay, where you have dynamically chosen on which the message content should go. Okay, so if you see the code, I've auto-wired the Kafka template, and then if you see the message in the send message, you will see there is a one method which is determine topic based on the message, which will determine from that particular message, okay, whether this particular message contains some urgent messages or not, okay, if it's a regular messages or not. So in that based on that certain condition, it will go to different topic. Okay, so this approach is quite simple, and it will be enrouted to the different topic based on certain conditions or logic what we apply. That's how we implement it. Your Spring Boot application has a Kafka consumer with high volume of messages. Now, producer has already published millions of messages. Okay, so there is a high volume of messages. Now, the consumer is going to consume that messages, right? But it is failing behind in processing those messages. Okay, what I mean, I need to scale up this particular application to handle the load. What are the steps we need to do? What I would need to do that, right? So scaling is a broader topic. Scaling is what the hot topic as of now, because there are millions of records which we need to process in within few seconds or within a few minutes, right? How you can scale it up, right? So either making use of cloud or what. So the to scale up the consumer application and how we can handle these particular messages, we can just look at. So what you have to do is that, as we are dealing with the instances, like there are some consumers what we are going to create, right? So we have to increase the number of instances for it. So what you have to do is that Kafka will create multiple consumer in the same consumer group to process different partitions in the parallel. So you can increase the number of instances on your Spring Boot application, that will horizontally scale your. So that's where one way where we can actually increase and scale up to the consumer instances. Second is partitioning. Now we have to ensure that whatever topics, the Kafka topic, it has to be partitioned up. Okay, so each partition is consumed by only one consumer in a group at a time. So there will be no at once, like not should be more than one. So this will increase the number of partition, and also it can increase your the parallel processing capacity. The consumption is going to consumer is going to consume. After this, what you can do is that there is an @Kafka listener. You can apply the concurrency over here. So you can specifically specify the multiple threads which are going to consume the particular messages concurrently. So from a single instance of consumer. So there is an annotations which says that @enable async or Kafka listener with a concurrency property. Now, if you see inside this particular annotation, there is an attribute called concurrency and the topic name. So in this, actually it will going to process in the concurrency. Also, you can opt for message batching. So that is always I would say batch processing of the particular message, so that in the bulk rather than individually reading that particular message. So it will make your performance better, and actually it will give better throughput. Okay. The next question is like, in your Spring Boot Kafka application, you need to ensure that the messages are not lost in the case of Kafka broker failure. Now there are you know hardware failures, software failures, right, or like whatever the server failures. So it can happen at any time. So how would you ensure that particular durability? Now, when it comes to durability of a message, right, you should Kafka gives you certain configuration for the producer and the consumer, and we look out for the best practices which can safeguard you, right? So at the producer side, if you look at the durability, there is a property called or a attribute called acknowledgement all. So this will ensure that your producer which is going to wait for the acknowledge from the all the replica of the partitions, right, before it is confirming that particular message is received. Okay, so what will happen is that the message is returned to the multiple replicas, and it is quite durable. Okay, so that will ensure that your durability of your application. So this particular property, the producer dot acknowledgement is equal to all, will ensure that. Now what you can do is that you can also enable certain retries and idempotency on the producer, which will handle the transient failures basically. So there is a property which is mentioned that producer dot retry, so how many times it should retry. Okay, that we can mention. Okay, so then we can mention some idempotency property is equal to true as well. Okay, now after the producer side, what we can do is that the consumer side, we have to manually set offset commit to ensure that the consumer can processes the messages, reprocess that particular messages, where exactly it certainly before the failure or the during the failure it has left off. Okay, in that case, what you have to do is that there is a property auto commit is going to false. Okay, so you have to enable that. uh, Now, this is one of the important, I would say, when it comes to Kafka, right? So you are trying to process some sensitive data, right? When you are dealing with servers and or the host which are not particularly in the same machine, right? You have to ensure that it is properly encrypted, the data, the communication is secure, right? So the question is about, like, you are having a sensitive data and you are trying to process it, and you're trying to publish it to certain topic. How would you implement the encryption in the description, like for the messages? Now, when you're dealing with the sensitive data, you should always ensure that certain type of encryption is already applied, okay, before it is sent to the Kafka topic. Okay, so what will ensure, let's say mistakenly somebody process it, right? So they will not be able to get the real essence of what message it is. They have to certainly understand what the law algorithm is applied to encrypt or decrypt it, right? So decryption at the consumer level is going to help them to decrypt it, and then they are going to process their own logic. Okay, so it plays a vital role when it comes to sending the messages back and forth between the servers, right? So ensure that you are encrypting the message before it is already sent. So implement certain encryption technologies, like the producer, so that before it is sent to the Kafka topic, right? So you can use certain libraries which are like JCE, right? Java concurrence cryptography extension. So this will ensure that your message is encrypted. Now, decrypting of this message after the consumer, right? This particular, it is consumed by the Kafka listener, I would say. So if you see here, this particular Kafka topic over here, you see that there is a Kafka topic, template written over here. Now before that, we have encrypted that particular message with certain base code 64 and encoding, like that get we have taken the bytes and then we have encrypted it. Okay, we are implementing here, and then after that it is going to send it to that particular topic, that particular same message. Okay, so here we are ensuring that it is particularly encrypted. Now at the decryption side, like once the message is published and then the consumer consumes it, right? What it have to do is that it cannot process it directly. It has to decrypt it and then it has to consume that particular message. So same base code, whatever the algorithm, whatever you are applied over there, the other party should also be having that particular same library implemented, and then you can decode it. Okay, so make sure that your it will depend on your requirement. It also, you might also also to consider some SSL encryption related communication between the Kafka broker and the consumer, right? So you can have this particular I mean, based on your requirement it can be done that, but yeah, basically it works like encryption and the decryption, where it will ensure your message is safeguarded. uh, the very next thing is that you have a Spring Boot Kafka consumer, which has got a high throughput. Okay, and the consumer group is processing messages quite slowly because maybe it is inefficient logic, whatever it is written. Now, he wanted to know, like, how would you optimize your consumer performance by the without compromising the message integrity, right? So that's what the question about. Now, optimizing is quite a skillful thing. I would say it's quite unnecessary because many possibilities that some developer might write logic in different ways, or it is night processing at its pace, right? So you have to ensure your consumer you're optimizing that particular Kafka consumer for the high throughput. You have to ensure that integrity requires for that both consumer setting and your message processing logic also, right? So you have to check in that. Now, what are the different approaches what we can improve the consumer's performance. Now, first of all, you have to increase the number of partition. Why? Because the more the number of partition, it will allow you to distribute the messages load evenly, okay, and across the consumer in a group. So that will improve your parallel processing, I would say. Okay. Now concurrency in the listener, basically at the rate listener, if you see Kafka listener, if you apply this particular concurrency and if you enable that particular multi-threading, right, it will process your messages parallelly with single consumer instance. You doesn't need to create a different instances, right? So that's the benefit of taking the thread uh, uh, concurrency. Now there are some efficient ways to processing the message. What we have to do is that we have to ensure your business logic, whatever it is written, it is quite efficient. Let's say you should avoid making certain database multiple database calls, right, for each of this particular message. So you have to do it in the batch, or you either use it as in asynchronous process which is not blocking. Okay. So make sure you are doing that so that it will ensure your performance. Now you have to offload your background processing, so for which are the tasks which are running for the long time, so consider them offloading them to the background job, because make it as an asynchronous, right? So make use of at the rate async, or you can use task executor of the Spring. So what will happen is that this consumer thread is going to focus on consuming the more messages which are being published, right? So without waking or without being blocked up. So it will complete its process, it will complete its task, and it will finish it. Now you can fine tune your consumer configuration. There are certain attributes or the parameters like fetch size. Now what will it do is that it will increase your minimum bytes and the maximum bytes to pull the messages from the per request. Okay. Now max poll interval, this will attribute is you allow to more times of processing before the consumer is being considered slow, right? Now batching, I would say consider batching for the consumer side, which is going to consume like the poll records to process multiple records in one poll itself. Okay, so number of records which can be polled up, you can configure that. uh, I hope like you was able to get that. Now you are building a Spring Boot application that has ensured that the message order are across multiple partition. Now when you're dealing with multiple partition, okay, and you want to ensure that particular message ordering is maintained, okay, how would you design that particular system? Now Kafka, when it comes to the messages, right? So it is going to guarantee the order only within single partition, right? So Kafka guarantees by design, I would say. Now if you have multiple partition of a particular topic, the message is definitely going to be processed out of order for different partitions. So there is no way, or like of course there is a way, but I mean if it is a single partition, there is things are easy, but if there are multiple partition, then definitely there is going to be some out of order partition things processing. Now in order to maintain that, what were the steps we have to do that? So you have to have a single partition per key. Now if you are maintaining this particular order for a specific type of messages, let's say adding some customer ID or quarter ID is required in that. Okay, so it will ensure all the messages which are related to that particular same key are sent to the same partition. Okay, so this will internally will be taken care by the Kafka, but this can be done using certain customer, I would say custom partitions or by you're ensuring some producer using some consistent key what you can send. Okay, so if you see here in this particular, you have under the send method, you have your topic, you have your customer ID, and then you have that particular message. So customer ID is a key to ensure that the order is going to be in the same partition or processed it. Now there are some custom partitions, so you have to implement the Kafka producer partitioner. So you have to control that particular partition assignment based on certain message key only. Okay. Now if you see here, there is an written statement where it says that mat.observe, and there is some hash code being generated for that particular key. Along with that, there is some partition count for the particular topic. So it is based on that, it is going to I mean the custom partition logic based on a certain key it will be applicable. Okay, so reordering of that particular message at certain consumer side. Now in some cases where the messages are not important, message order is important, right? If they are processed out of order, you may need to introduce certain additional order mechanism in your consumer logic. For instance, each consumer can keep track of last messages which are processed and wait for the message to arrive in the order, basically. So that's how we deal with it. I hope this questionnaires or scenario based, which are asked in the real interview companies, right? So it was helpful to you, and it gives you a glimpse of like what kind of scenario based Kafka topics interview can you should be prepared about, and also what level of complexity or the level of questions asked by the interviewer will give you a glimpse of it, right? I hope this video was very helpful to you, and in some term it increased your knowledge about the Kafka. Okay, and you're little bit more confident and have more knowledge when you haven't or didn't watch this particular video, right? Thank you. If you uh, if this video was helpful to you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you.